It's over, Claire.
A week after our daughter was born?
Was the divorce worth everything you lost? The day he stopped respecting me was the day he lost me.
I traded my family for a lie.
Claire Morrison had been home from the hospital for less than 3 days when her husband laid divorce papers on the kitchen table and calmly told her their marriage was over. Their newborn daughter slept in a bassinet beside the couch, unaware that her parents' future was being torn apart before she was even a week old. Ryan didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His relationship with another woman was no longer a rumor. His mother openly approved of it. His co-workers already treated Claire like someone being phased out of Ryan's life. As he spoke about lawyers' custody schedules and moving forward, Claire's eyes drifted toward an unopened envelope sitting beside a stack of diapers. It had come from her grandmother's attorney 2 days earlier. She still hadn't opened it. Ryan never once asked what was inside. And neither of them knew that the answer would change far more than their marriage. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 6 months earlier, Claire still believed her marriage could be saved. Spring had finally arrived in the Chicago suburbs. The trees lining their quiet street had begun to bloom, and sunlight poured through the kitchen windows each morning. Claire stood at the counter making coffee while reviewing notes from a prenatal appointment. The pregnancy had not been easy. After years of fertility treatments, disappointments, and emotional exhaustion, she was finally expecting a baby girl. The journey had cost more than money. It had cost energy, career momentum, and pieces of herself she wasn't sure she would ever fully recover. Still, she never regretted it. Across the room, Ryan adjusted his tie while scanning emails on his phone. Things had changed since his promotion. A year earlier, he had been ambitious but approachable. Now he carried himself differently, more important, more impatient. His new position as senior vice president at a fast-growing logistics technology company had become the center of his identity. Sometimes it felt like everything else came second. "Big meeting today?" Claire asked. Ryan barely looked up. "Board review." She smiled. "You'll do great." He nodded absently and grabbed his briefcase. "No thank you, no smile, no kiss goodbye. Just another morning." The front door closed behind him. Claire stared at the empty doorway longer than she wanted to admit. She told herself it was stress. Nothing more. Successful careers came with pressure. She understood that. After all, before leaving work during her difficult pregnancy, she had built a strong career in corporate finance herself. But very few people still talked about that. Least of all Ryan. Over the following weeks, small comments became harder to ignore. Whenever finances came up, Ryan spoke as though he carried the entire household alone. Whenever friends discussed careers, he referred to Claire as someone who had stepped away from the professional world. At first, she laughed it off. Then she noticed the pattern. One evening at dinner, Ryan's mother Evelyn joined them. The conversation drifted toward household expenses. Evelyn glanced toward Claire. "You're lucky Ryan works as hard as he does." Claire smiled politely. "I worked pretty hard too before maternity leave." Evelyn chuckled. "Sweetheart, that's different." Claire felt something tighten inside her chest. Ryan said nothing. Not a single word. The silence hurt more than the comment itself, because defending her would have required almost no effort. After dinner, Evelyn left satisfied. Ryan returned to answering emails. The subject was never mentioned again. A few days later, Claire found another envelope waiting in the mailbox. Same law office, same attorney, David Mercer. She recognized the letterhead immediately. The correspondence had started months earlier, after her grandmother's health began declining. Each letter requested a meeting. Nothing urgent. Nothing alarming. At least not according to the summaries. Claire placed the envelope in a drawer beside the others. She would deal with it later. There were doctor appointments. Nursery preparations, baby classes. Life felt too full already. Meanwhile, Ryan seemed increasingly absent even when physically present. Late meetings became common. Business dinners multiplied. Weekend strategy sessions appeared without warning. His explanations always sounded reasonable. Individually, none of them seemed suspicious. Together, they formed a growing distance neither of them acknowledged. One Friday afternoon, Claire drove downtown to surprise Ryan with lunch. It wasn't something she normally did. She simply missed him. The receptionist smiled politely when Claire arrived. "Ryan's still upstairs. I'll wait." While sitting near the elevators, she noticed a woman exiting a conference room. Tall, polished, confident. Vanessa Hart. Claire recognized her from company newsletters. Ryan had mentioned her several times. A highly recruited corporate strategist. Fast rising. Exceptionally talented. According to Ryan, Vanessa crossed the lobby speaking into her phone. She didn't see Claire. A moment later, Ryan appeared from another hallway. His expression softened instantly when he saw Vanessa. They exchanged a quick conversation. Too far away to hear, too familiar to ignore. Then Vanessa left. Ryan finally noticed Claire. For a split second, surprise flashed across his face. Not happiness, surprise. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I thought we could have lunch." "Oh, just one word." "Oh." The disappointment settled quietly inside her. They ate together anyway. The conversation felt forced. Ryan checked his phone repeatedly. Twice he mentioned Vanessa's name while discussing a new project. 3 times, without realizing it, he smiled, more talking about work than talking to his wife. That night, Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She wanted to believe she was imagining things. Pregnancy hormones, stress, fear, anything except what her instincts were telling her. The next evening, Ryan texted that he would be working late again. Near 9 o'clock, Claire drove to the office parking garage to drop off a folder he had forgotten at home. She never intended to go upstairs. But as she stepped from the elevator, she saw someone exiting Ryan's office corridor. Vanessa. She carried a thick stack of documents against her chest. As she passed beneath the hallway lights, one page shifted loose enough for Claire to glimpse the heading. Confidential. Vanessa looked around quickly before disappearing toward the elevators. Then Claire noticed something else. Ryan's office door was still open, and the light inside was on. She stood frozen in the hallway. For the first time, the uneasy feeling she'd been pushing away no longer felt like imagination. It felt like a warning. Claire did not move at first. She stood near the elevator with Ryan's forgotten folder pressed against her chest, watching the hallway where Vanessa had disappeared. The office was mostly empty now. Only a few lights remained on behind glass walls. The place smelled faintly of coffee carpet cleaner, and the kind of ambition people wore like perfume. Ryan's office door stayed open. Inside, his desk lamp glowed over scattered papers. His suit jacket hung on the back of his chair. His laptop was still awake but angled away from the door. Claire knew she should step forward, call his name, hand him the folder, and leave. Instead, she waited. A few seconds later, Ryan came out of a side conference room with his phone in his hand. He looked relaxed until he saw her. "Claire," he said, stopping short. "What are you doing here?" She lifted the folder. "You forgot this." For a moment, he did not take it. His eyes flicked past her toward the elevators, the same direction Vanessa had gone. Then he moved quickly, almost too quickly, and reached for the folder. "You shouldn't be driving downtown this late," he said. It sounded like concern, but it did not feel like concern. "I was trying to help." "I know," he said, but his voice was tight. "Next time, just call me." Claire nodded. She wanted to ask about Vanessa. She wanted to ask why a strategist was leaving his office after hours with confidential documents. She wanted to ask why he looked more guilty than grateful. But the baby shifted inside her, a slow pressure beneath her ribs, and suddenly she felt too tired for the answer. On the drive home, she'd kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other near her stomach. The city lights stretched across the windshield. Ryan's words sat beside her like a stranger. Next time, just call me. Not thank you. Not I'm glad you came. Not stay a minute. Just distance polished enough to pass as care. The next week, Ryan began bringing Vanessa's name home more often. At first, it was innocent. Vanessa had found a flaw in a client proposal. Vanessa had impressed the CEO. Vanessa understood how executive relationships worked. Vanessa knew how to read a room. Claire listened quietly from the kitchen table while folding tiny onesies for the nursery. She sounds talented, Claire said one evening. Ryan loosened his tie and poured himself a drink. She is, very. She has drive. The word landed softly, but Claire felt it anyway. Drive. As if Claire had misplaced hers somewhere between fertility appointments, morning sickness, and unpaid emotional labor. I had drive too, she said before she could stop herself. Ryan glanced at her. I didn't mean it that way, but he did not correct himself either. By then, Vanessa Hart had become part of the air around them, not physically at first. Just through references, late calls, sudden schedule changes, and the faint smile Ryan tried to hide when his phone lit up. Then the company events started. The first was a small networking dinner downtown. Claire had already chosen a simple black maternity dress. It was the nicest thing that still fit comfortably. She stood in front of the bedroom mirror, smoothing the fabric over her stomach, trying not to notice how swollen her ankles looked. Ryan walked in, checked his watch, and paused. You're getting ready. Claire looked at him through the mirror. For the dinner. His expression changed in a way she hated. Not shock exactly. Something closer to inconvenience. I didn't think you were coming. You said spouses were invited. They are, he said carefully. But it's not really that kind of dinner. It's more strategic. Investors, senior leadership people who expect a certain energy. Claire turned around slowly. A certain energy, Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. You've been tired. And honestly, these events run late. I don't want you uncomfortable. There it was again. Concern that somehow made her smaller. She wanted to argue, but his phone buzzed before she could speak. He looked down, and the corner of his mouth lifted. Vanessa. Claire did not need to see the name. She knew from his face. You should go, she said. Ryan hesitated only long enough to pretend it bothered him. Then he kissed her forehead and left. That night, Claire sat in the nursery with the lights low, surrounded by half-built shelves and unopened baby gifts. Her phone rested on her lap. She told herself not to check social media. She checked anyway. The company had posted photos from the dinner. Ryan stood near the center of one image, smiling broadly, his hand resting lightly at Vanessa Hart's back. She wore a fitted cream suit, elegant and confident, with a glass of champagne in her hand. Everyone around them looked polished, important, alive. Claire stared at the photo until the screen dimmed. She did not cry. Not then. She simply placed the phone face down and looked around the nursery she had spent weeks preparing alone. A few days later, Evelyn came by with a bag of expensive baby clothes and opinions Claire had not asked for. Ryan's mother swept through the house in a tailored coat, inspecting the nursery with a tight smile. It's sweet, Evelyn said. A little simple, but sweet. Claire folded a blanket into the dresser drawer. We wanted it calm. Evelyn made a soft sound. Ryan has moved into a different class now. You should remember that. Appearances matter more than you think. Claire closed the drawer slowly. I know appearances matter to Ryan. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. My son needs a wife who understands the level he's reaching, not someone who hides at home and makes him feel guilty for succeeding. The words were quiet, almost polite. That made them worse. Claire looked at the woman who would soon become her daughter's grandmother and wondered when love had become a job interview. Before leaving, Evelyn noticed a stack of unopened mail on the entry table. Her gaze fell on one envelope in particular. David Mercer, attorney at law. Legal trouble? Evelyn asked. Claire picked it up quickly. No, family paperwork. From your side? Yes, Evelyn gave a faint smile. Well, I'm sure it can wait. Nothing important ever seems to move quickly with small estates. Claire did not answer. The envelope felt heavier in her hand than paper should. That evening, Ryan came home late again. He smelled faintly of restaurant wine and someone else's perfume. Claire was sitting at the kitchen table, with tea gone cold beside her. The attorney's envelope sat unopened near her elbow. Ryan barely glanced at it. Long day, he said, dropping his keys. With Vanessa? He froze, only for a second. Then he laughed under his breath. Don't start. I'm asking a question. You're making something out of nothing because you feel insecure. The word hit harder than she expected. Insecure. As if her pain was a flaw in her character, not a reaction to what he was doing. Claire looked down at her hands. Her wedding ring felt tight from pregnancy swelling. She turned it slowly around her finger. I miss when you spoke to me like I mattered, she said. Ryan sighed, already tired of the conversation. Claire, I can't keep shrinking my life to make you comfortable. She looked up at him then. He seemed taller than he used to, not because he had grown, but because he had placed himself above her. I never asked you to shrink, she said softly. I asked you not to leave me behind. For the first time that night, Ryan had no answer. His phone buzzed again. This time Claire saw the name, Vanessa Hart. Ryan turned the screen over too late. The next morning, Claire woke to the sound of her own phone vibrating on the nightstand. Ryan had already left. The house was still. Pale sunlight touched the unopened envelopes on the dresser, including the one from David Mercer. She reached for the phone, expecting a reminder from her doctor. Instead, a voicemail notification waited from an unfamiliar number. Claire pressed play. A calm, professional voice filled the quiet bedroom. Mrs. Morrison Dalton, this is David Mercer's office calling again regarding your grandmother's estate. We need to speak with you as soon as possible. There is a time-sensitive matter connected to the Morrison family holdings, and we cannot proceed without your authorization. Claire sat up slowly, one hand moving to her stomach. The message continued. Please call us back today. This deadline is no longer optional. Claire replayed the voicemail 3 times before she finally called the number back. The woman who answered sounded professional and patient, as if she had been expecting the call for weeks. Mrs. Morrison Dalton, Mr. Mercer has been trying to reach you regarding your grandmother's estate. Claire closed her eyes briefly. I know. I should have responded earlier. There are documents that require your review. Mr. Mercer would like to meet with you as soon as possible. Can it wait until after the baby arrives? There was a brief pause. Respectfully, ma'am, some matters have already been waiting quite a long time. The answer stayed with her long after the call ended. For the rest of the day, she kept glancing toward the unopened envelopes stacked in a kitchen drawer. Something about the attorney's persistence felt different now. Not alarming, just important. Yet every time she considered opening the letters, something else demanded attention. A doctor appointment, a nursery delivery, a sudden request from Ryan. Another lonely evening. Life had a way of pushing difficult conversations into tomorrow. Then Emma decided she was ready to arrive. The labor began in the middle of the night during a thunderstorm. Ryan drove her to the hospital tense and distracted. He held her hand when contractions became unbearable. He spoke softly when nurses entered the room. For a few hours, Claire allowed herself to believe everything would be okay. Their daughter was born just after sunrise, healthy, beautiful, perfect. When the nurse placed Emma in her arms for the first time, Claire cried harder than she had in years. Every struggle suddenly felt worth it. Every injection, every failed treatment, every sleepless night. Emma wrapped tiny fingers around Claire's thumb and held on. Ryan smiled for photos. He kissed Emma's forehead. He even kissed Claire. From the outside, they looked like a family beginning a new chapter, But something was missing. The warmth disappeared whenever cameras were gone. The distance returned whenever they were alone. Ryan spent more time looking at his phone than looking at his daughter. He left the hospital frequently for important calls. Once Claire woke from a nap and found his chair empty. Another time she overheard him speaking quietly in the hallway. His voice softened in a way she hadn't heard in months. Not with her, with someone else. She never heard the name. She didn't need to. The answer already lived in her stomach like a stone. By the third day, Ryan announced he needed to return to work. Already, Claire asked, "The company needs me. The company always needs you." He looked away. Neither of them said what they were actually thinking. 2 days later, she returned home. The house looked exactly the same, but it felt different. The silence felt heavier. Ryan arrived late that evening carrying takeout containers and excuses. He barely touched either. The next morning, Claire found herself alone again with Emma sleeping nearby. She was exhausted, sore, emotionally raw. Motherhood had barely begun. Then she heard Ryan's car pull into the driveway. Relief flickered briefly. Maybe he had taken time off. Maybe they could finally talk. Maybe the front door opened. Ryan walked inside carrying a leather portfolio. His expression was strangely calm. Too calm. "Can we sit down?" he asked. Claire immediately felt cold. He set the portfolio on the kitchen table and opened it. Legal documents appeared. Her heart dropped before she read a single word. "Ryan." He avoided her eyes. "I think we both know this isn't working anymore." The room seemed to shrink. Emma slept quietly in the bassinet near the couch. The dishwasher hummed softly in the background. Outside, a lawnmower passed somewhere down the street. Normal sounds. An ordinary day. Yet everything was changing. "You're giving me divorce papers," she whispered. Ryan exhaled slowly. "This has been coming for a long time." "Not for me." "Claire." "No." Her voice cracked. "You don't get to say that. We just had a baby." His jaw tightened. "I stayed longer than I should have because of the pregnancy." The words hit harder than shouting ever could. For several seconds, she simply stared at him. Not because she didn't understand. Because she finally did. The distance, the secrecy, the late nights, Vanessa. Every piece suddenly fit together. "You're with her." Ryan rubbed his forehead. "I didn't come here to discuss Vanessa." Which was answer enough. Claire looked toward her daughter. Emma slept peacefully, too young to understand that her family had already been broken apart. "What exactly are you asking for? A clean separation?" Ryan slid documents toward her. "There are proposed custody arrangements, property terms, financial support. You already prepared all of this. It's better to be organized." Organized. As if ending a marriage were an accounting project. As if a newborn child were another calendar obligation. Claire flipped through pages she could barely see through tears. Ryan continued speaking. Lawyers, schedules, future arrangements, moving forward. The language sounded professional, efficient, emotionless. Then he said something that made everything worse. "You don't need to worry about legal costs. I'll handle everything." The implication was obvious. He believed she couldn't. He believed she had nowhere else to turn. No resources, no leverage, no real options. Just a dependent wife recovering from childbirth. Claire said nothing. Not because she agreed, because she was too tired to fight. Eventually, Ryan stood. Take a few days to review everything. He walked toward the door, then paused. "One more thing." Her stomach tightened. "I moved most of the shared funds into separate accounts until the attorneys sort things out." Claire stared at him. "You did what it's temporary." Temporary. Like the marriage. Like his promises. Like everything she once trusted. The front door closed behind him. Silence flooded the house. For a long time, Claire remained seated at the table. Emma stirred softly nearby. The divorce papers sat untouched. Then her eyes drifted toward the stack of unopened mail near the counter. Among baby supply receipts and hospital paperwork sat the familiar envelope. David Mercer, attorney at law. For the first time, she reached for it. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the seal. Inside were several pages. She began reading. The first page made her sit up straighter. The second made her read slower. By the third page, every trace of exhaustion had disappeared from her face. Outside evening shadows stretched across the yard. Inside, Claire carefully picked up her phone. Then she dialed a number she had ignored for months. When David Mercer answered, she spoke only one sentence. "I think we need to meet immediately." David Mercer's office occupied the top floor of a quiet building overlooking downtown Chicago. There were no flashy signs outside, no marble statues in the lobby. Just polished wood, discreet security, and the kind of silence that usually surrounded expensive decisions. Claire arrived carrying Emma in a car seat and a diaper bag over one shoulder. She felt exhausted, not only physically, emotionally. 3 days earlier, she had been planning a future as a wife and mother. Now she was preparing for divorce while trying to understand a legal letter she barely recognized. A receptionist greeted her immediately. "Mrs. Morrison Dalton, Mr. Mercer is expecting you." The use of her maiden name caught her attention. Not Claire Dalton, not Mrs. Ryan Dalton. Morrison. The name felt strangely unfamiliar. David Mercer stood when she entered his office. He appeared to be in his 60s, neatly dressed with silver hair and the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades managing complicated family matters. His expression softened when he saw Emma. "She's beautiful," he said. "Thank you." He waited until Claire sat down before speaking again. "First, I'm sorry about your grandmother." A knot tightened in Claire's chest. Her grandmother, Eleanor Morrison, had passed away 6 months earlier. During pregnancy complications and marital problems, grief had quietly moved into the background. Now, it returned all at once. "She was stubborn," Claire said with a sad smile. Mercer laughed softly. "That is a very accurate description." For a moment, the room felt lighter. Then he opened a thick file resting on his desk. "Everything changed. Your grandmother instructed us to delay certain disclosures until specific legal conditions were met," he said. Claire frowned. What kind of disclosures? Mercer slid several documents across the desk. Financial trusts, investment structures, ownership interests. The words sounded familiar. She had spent years working in finance before leaving her career during pregnancy. Yet none of this made immediate sense. "What does any of this have to do with me?" Mercer looked directly at her. "Everything." The room suddenly felt smaller. "You were named successor beneficiary years ago." Claire blinked. "Years ago, yes. Why didn't anyone tell me your grandmother specifically requested confidentiality?" Mercer opened another folder. "She believed public knowledge would affect your relationships." The statement lingered between them. Relationships. Marriage. Family. Friendships. People treated differently when money entered the conversation. Claire looked down at the documents again. Trust names, holding companies, partnership structures, signatures, pages and pages of legal language. Her grandmother had built an entire system she never fully discussed. "You're saying she left all this to me?" "Not immediately," Mercer said. "Control transfers occur through several stages." The answer was careful, precise, almost deliberately incomplete. Claire noticed. "What aren't you telling me?" Mercer smiled slightly. Quite a lot, actually. For the first time that day, curiosity replaced fear. He spent the next hour explaining the framework. Not the numbers. Not yet. The structure. Multiple trusts, long-term investments, family holdings, voting interests, successor responsibilities. The more Claire listened, the more she realized her grandmother had lived a very different life than most people knew. Even Claire herself. The woman who baked pies every Thanksgiving, and sent handwritten birthday cards, apparently managed business relationships stretching back decades. Somehow the image felt impossible and completely believable at the same time. When the meeting ended, Mercer handed her another folder. "Review these carefully." Claire glanced at the cover page. Morrison Holdings. The name appeared repeatedly throughout the documents. She had never heard it mentioned growing up. Is Morrison Holdings a holding company? Large Mercer folded his hands. Significant. That answer felt intentional, too. Every response revealed something while hiding something else, as if he were opening a door inch by inch. Outside the office, Claire sat in her car for nearly 20 minutes before starting the engine. Emma slept peacefully in the back seat. The city moved around them. People walked to lunch. Traffic lights changed. Life continued normally. Yet nothing felt normal anymore. That evening, Ryan called. Not to ask about Emma. Not to check on Claire. To discuss paperwork. I emailed revisions to the custody proposal. Claire stared out the kitchen window while holding the phone. Already, the attorneys wanted movement. Of course they did. Everything in Ryan's world moved according to schedules now. Targets, deadlines, deliverables. Human feelings simply created delays. "How was your day?" she asked quietly. There was a pause. "Fine." He didn't ask about hers. He never asked about the attorney meeting. In fact, he still seemed completely unaware that it mattered. That ignorance was becoming increasingly obvious. Ryan believed the future belonged entirely to him. The successful executive, the provider, the one with options. Claire listened to him discuss paperwork while an unopened folder labeled Morrison Holdings sat beside her. Eventually, he ended the call. Neither said goodbye. 2 days later, Mercer requested another meeting. This one felt different from the beginning. Additional attorneys attended. More documents waited on the conference table. The atmosphere was more formal, more serious. Mercer opened a presentation folder. Inside were organizational charts showing ownership structures. Some names meant nothing to Claire. Others triggered distant memories, old family conversations, references she never understood. Your grandmother maintained controlling interests through multiple entities, Mercer explained. Claire slowly turned pages. Then she froze. One familiar corporate logo appeared among the charts. Her pulse quickened. She recognized it immediately. The logistics technology company where Ryan worked. She looked up. There has to be a mistake. There isn't. Mercer adjusted his glasses. Morrison Holdings has maintained a substantial ownership position for many years. The words landed harder than anything she had heard since Ryan served divorce papers. Ryan spent years climbing the corporate ladder. Late nights, promotions, business dinners, board presentations. All inside a company connected to a family structure he never even knew existed. A strange feeling settled over Claire. Not satisfaction, not revenge, something quieter. Perspective. For months, Ryan had treated her as someone with no leverage, no future, no influence. Yet he had no idea what stood quietly in the background of her life. Mercer closed the folder. There is one more matter we need to discuss. Claire looked up. What kind of matter? Mercer's expression grew serious. The board of directors will be voting on several governance issues next month. He paused. And under the trust structure established by your grandmother, your participation may be required. For the first time since entering the room, Claire understood that this situation was becoming much larger than inheritance, much larger than divorce. And somewhere across the city, Ryan remained completely unaware that the woman he had discarded was about to become impossible to ignore. Claire spent the next week doing something Ryan never expected. She stopped reacting. She answered messages politely. She responded to attorney requests on time. She documented every financial statement that arrived in the mail. And whenever Ryan called to discuss the divorce, she spoke calmly enough to make him uncomfortable. The panic he expected never came. The begging never came. The emotional collapse never came. Instead, she listened. She took notes, and she quietly built a file. Emma slept beside her during many of those late-night sessions. The tiny apartment-sized nursery felt less like a nursery now and more like a command center. Bank statements covered the dining table. Credit card summaries sat in organized folders. Legal correspondence occupied an entire drawer. The more Clare reviewed, the more questions appeared. Several large transfers had been made from joint accounts during the final months of the marriage. Luxury hotel charges appeared in cities where Ryan claimed to be attending conferences. Expensive gifts had been purchased using accounts funded partly by marital income. Some explanations existed, others did not. Clare forwarded everything to the family law attorney Mercer had recommended. Her name was Rebecca Sloan. Experienced, methodical, and impossible to intimidate. During their second meeting, Rebecca reviewed several pages before leaning back in her chair. "When did you first become aware of the relationship with Vanessa Hart?" Clare hesitated. "I suspected months ago, but no confirmation, not until recently." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Good." Clare frowned. "Good? It means we focus on evidence instead of assumptions?" She tapped several highlighted transactions. "These transfers concern me more." Clare looked down. "Why? Because if marital assets were diverted for purposes unrelated to the marriage, while separation was being planned, the court may want answers." For the first time since receiving divorce papers, Clare felt something shifting. Not revenge, protection, facts mattered, documentation mattered, the truth mattered. And unlike emotions, facts left a trail. Meanwhile, Ryan appeared increasingly confident. The confidence showed up in small ways. His messages became shorter. His offers became less generous. His assumptions became more obvious. During one phone call, he casually mentioned that lengthy legal disputes could become financially exhausting. "You don't want this dragging out," he said. The implication hung in the air. "You can't afford it." Clare stared out the window while Emma slept nearby. "Then perhaps honesty will save everyone time." Ryan laughed softly. "You always think things are simpler than they are." The call ended a minute later, but his words stayed behind, not because they hurt, because they revealed exactly what he believed. He still saw her as dependent, still saw her as vulnerable, still assumed she lacked resources. The truth remained hidden behind layers of legal confidentiality he knew nothing about. Across town, Vanessa's confidence seemed to be growing too. Clare first noticed through social media, then through mutual acquaintances, then through rumors. Vanessa attended events Ryan once brought his wife to. Vanessa accompanied him to executive dinners. Vanessa appeared in photographs that circulated around the company, not officially, not openly, but close enough. One afternoon, Clare attended a pediatric appointment with Emma. While waiting for paperwork, she overheard two women discussing Ryan's company. Neither recognized her. "She'll probably be engaged within a year." "Vanessa, absolutely. I heard he's basically separated already." The women laughed quietly. Clare looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her stroller. She felt the familiar sting. Not because strangers were talking, because somewhere along the way, people had begun discussing the future of her marriage before she even knew it was ending. That realization hurt more than the gossip itself. A week later, Rebecca requested another meeting. This one lasted nearly 3 hours. The attorney's conference table filled with spreadsheets, account records, communications, and disclosures filed by Ryan's legal team. Rebecca studied one section repeatedly. Finally, she removed her glasses. Something isn't matching. Clare immediately sat forward. What reported balances? Rebecca pointed toward several documents. According to these disclosures, certain funds no longer exist. And according to the bank records we obtained, they appear to have gone somewhere. Silence settled across the room. Not dramatic silence. Professional silence, the kind lawyers respected. Rebecca turned several pages. I'm not accusing anyone of wrongdoing yet. The phrasing mattered, yet. But if assets were moved improperly before or during divorce proceedings, the court will want complete explanations. Claire felt her pulse quicken. Do you think Ryan knows Rebecca gave a careful answer? I think somebody made decisions expecting those decisions would never be examined closely. That night, Claire sat alone after putting Emma to bed. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The house felt different now. Not happier, not easier, but stronger somehow. For months she had measured her value through Ryan's eyes, through his disappointment, his neglect, his growing attraction to someone else. Now she was beginning to see things differently. Not because of money, not because of inheritance, because she was finally seeing reality clearly. Her phone vibrated. A new email had arrived. Sender David Mercer. Subject Morrison Holdings Governance Update. Claire opened it immediately. The message was brief, professional, direct. A board vote had been scheduled for the following month. Attendance from key trust representatives would be required. Several governance matters affecting major portfolio holdings would be considered. Attached below was a confidential agenda. Claire scanned the first page, then froze. Halfway down the document, she recognized a familiar corporate name. Ryan's company. Her eyes moved slowly across the line. The upcoming vote could directly affect board oversight and executive leadership structures. For a long moment, she simply stared. Somewhere in Chicago, Ryan was likely planning his future, preparing for promotions, building a life with Vanessa, assuming complete control of the narrative, completely unaware that a boardroom he had spent years trying to impress was about to become the last place he ever expected to see Clare Morrison. Ryan arrived at headquarters before 7 that morning. The quarterly governance meeting was one of the most important events of the year. Several board members would attend in person. Investors were watching closely. Senior leadership positions were expected to be discussed. For weeks, rumors had circulated through the executive floor. A restructuring, new oversight initiatives, possible promotions. Ryan intended to be part of that future. As he stepped from the elevator, he felt confident for the first time in months. The divorce was progressing. Vanessa was openly part of his life now. The uncertainty surrounding Claire seemed largely behind him. At least that was what he believed. The boardroom occupied the top floor of the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Chicago. A long walnut table stretched across the center of the room. Nameplates had already been arranged. Ryan greeted several executives. Vanessa arrived minutes later carrying a portfolio. She smiled at him. Professional, controlled, but familiar enough that people noticed. Neither seemed concerned anymore. Why would they be? The marriage was ending. The future was waiting. Then the atmosphere shifted. Several unfamiliar individuals entered the room accompanied by corporate counsel. Not consultants, not auditors, senior representatives. The room grew noticeably quieter. One executive leaned toward another. Those are Morrison people. Ryan heard the comment, but paid little attention. The name meant nothing to him. The meeting began. Routine reports came first. Revenue projections, operational updates, forecasts. Everything felt normal. Until corporate counsel stood. Before proceeding to governance matters, I'd like to welcome representatives of Morrison Holdings. The room became still. Ryan watched several board members straighten in their seats. The reaction surprised him. Apparently, Morrison Holdings carried more influence than he realized. A side door opened. 3 individuals entered, a senior attorney, a trust administrator, and one more person. Ryan felt the blood drain from his face. Claire. For a moment he genuinely believed he was mistaken. Sleep deprivation, stress, anything else. But it was her. She walked calmly beside the others carrying a leather portfolio. Not nervous, not uncertain. not the frightened woman who had received divorce papers weeks earlier. She looked composed, healthy, focused. The room watched her enter. No one questioned her presence. No one looked surprised except Ryan and Vanessa. Ryan stared as Claire took a seat near the front of the room, directly beside the trust administrator, directly across from the chairman. "What is she doing here?" Vanessa whispered. Ryan had no answer. Neither did anyone sitting nearby. The chairman cleared his throat. Before today's vote, certain trust representation matters must be formally acknowledged for the record. Documents were distributed. Ryan scanned the first page. His confusion deepened immediately. The name appeared repeatedly. Clare Morrison Dalton, successor trustee representative, beneficiary delegate, voting authority. The words blurred together. None of it made sense. He looked across the table. Clare never once looked in his direction. Corporate counsel continued speaking. Morrison Holdings has maintained a significant ownership position within the company through multiple affiliated structures for many years. Ryan's stomach tightened. Years, not weeks, not months. Years. This was not some sudden acquisition, not a revenge scheme, not a post-divorce maneuver. It had existed long before the marriage collapsed. Long before Vanessa. Long before any of this. The realization unsettled him more than anger would have. Everything he thought he understood suddenly felt incomplete. The presentation moved forward. Ownership charts appeared on large screens, trust structures, governance relationships, voting rights, historical holdings. Ryan recognized company names throughout the portfolio: transportation, technology, infrastructure, logistics. The scale exceeded anything he imagined. Vanessa leaned closer. How much does this family actually own? Ryan remained silent, because he didn't know. And for the first time in years, ignorance made him uncomfortable. The chairman eventually addressed Clare directly. "Mrs. Morrison Dalton, do you wish to make any comments before voting begins?" Several heads turned toward her, including Ryan's. Clare spoke calmly, professionally, without emotion. Only that governance responsibilities should be approached with long-term accountability in mind. Nothing dramatic, nothing threatening. Yet somehow the words landed harder than any accusation. Accountability. The very thing Ryan had spent months avoiding. The votes proceeded. No one was fired. No dramatic takeover occurred. No public humiliation unfolded. Reality was quieter than that. But reality often carried more weight. By the time the meeting ended, every executive in the room understood something Ryan had never bothered to learn. Clare was not connected to Morrison Holdings through luck, or marriage, or circumstance. She belonged there. Afterward, conversations erupted throughout the floor. Executives whispered. Assistants exchanged messages. Questions traveled faster than facts. Ryan finally caught up to Clare near a private conference area. "Clare." She stopped, slowly turned, met his eyes. The distance between them felt enormous. "What was that?" he asked. A flicker of sadness crossed her face. "Not satisfaction, not triumph, sadness. You never asked." Ryan stared at her. "What does that mean when the letters arrived?" Her voice remained calm. "When my grandmother died." Another pause. "When I spent months trying to tell you something mattered." The memories hit him all at once. The unopened envelopes. The attorney. The conversations he dismissed. The assumptions he never questioned. Ryan suddenly realized there had been clues everywhere. He simply chose not to see them, because he thought he already knew who Clare was, and who she wasn't. Before he could respond, the trust administrator approached. "Mrs. Morrison, we're ready." She nodded, then looked back at Ryan one final time. Not angrily, not cruelly, just differently, as though she finally understood something about him that could never be unseen. Moments later, she disappeared into another conference room with senior representatives from Morrison Holdings. Ryan remained standing alone in the hallway. Across the building, phones continued ringing. Meetings continued. Business continued. But for Ryan, everything had changed. Because for the first time, he began asking a question he should have asked long ago. Exactly who had he divorced, and how much of her life had he never truly known? The boardroom revelation spread through the company faster than Ryan expected. Not because anyone officially announced it, because people talked, executives talked, assistants talked, investors asked questions. By the following week, the story had evolved into dozens of versions, some exaggerated, some completely wrong. But every version included one uncomfortable fact. Ryan's estranged wife was connected to Morrison Holdings, and Morrison Holdings mattered. For the first time in years, Ryan found himself walking into meetings feeling uncertain. Questions followed him. Careful questions. Polite questions. The kind people asked when they knew something had changed but weren't sure how much. Vanessa hated it. She hated the whispers. She hated the speculation. Most of all, she hated that Clare suddenly occupied conversations she had expected to dominate herself. One evening, she sat across from Ryan in an upscale restaurant downtown. "You need to get ahead of this." Ryan rubbed his temples. Get ahead of what? The perception? He looked at her. What perception that you didn't know? The words landed harder than she intended. Ryan stared through the restaurant window. Because she was right. He hadn't known. Not about the trusts, not about Morrison Holdings, not about the inheritance structure. Not about any of it. The realization embarrassed him more than he wanted to admit. For years he believed he understood Clare completely. Now he wasn't sure he had ever truly paid attention. Meanwhile, Clare's life moved in an entirely different direction. The legal process accelerated. Depositions were scheduled. Financial disclosures expanded. Requests for records multiplied. Every document generated new questions. Rebecca Sloan approached the case with relentless patience. She never raised her voice, never made dramatic accusations. She simply followed the evidence wherever it led. One afternoon, she arrived carrying several folders. She placed them carefully on the conference table. More account records. Clare looked up from her notes. Anything important? Rebecca opened the first folder. Potentially. The attorney slid several pages forward. Wire transfers, account movements, expense reports, credit card statements. Each transaction appeared ordinary in isolation. Together, they painted a very different picture. Clare reviewed the dates. Most occurred before Ryan filed for divorce. Many corresponded with trips involving Vanessa. Expensive trips, luxury purchases, private accommodations. Benefits funded at least in part through money originating from marital accounts. Clare slowly exhaled. He was planning everything. Rebecca nodded, possibly, before Emma was born. Another pause. Possibly. The careful language mattered. Facts first, conclusions later. That discipline gave Clare confidence. The truth no longer depended on emotions. The documents could speak for themselves. Several weeks later, both legal teams met to review financial disclosures. The atmosphere remained professional. No shouting, no dramatic confrontations. Just attorneys, accountants, records, and evidence. Exactly where Rebecca wanted the conversation. Ryan arrived looking tired. The confidence that once surrounded him had faded around the edges. Not completely, but enough to notice. When questions arose regarding certain transfers, his attorney requested clarification. When additional accounts appeared, more clarification followed. Then another issue emerged. Several reported balances failed to align with independent banking records. The discrepancy wasn't enormous, but it existed. And once identified, it could not be ignored. Ryan's attorney requested time to review. Rebecca simply nodded. No celebration, no attack. Just documentation. As everyone gathered papers, Ryan finally found himself alone with Clare in a conference room hallway. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence felt strangely familiar, like the silence that had lived inside their marriage long before the divorce. Ryan looked exhausted, older somehow. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Clare considered the question. "The legal process continues. I meant us." The word surprised her. Us. As if the marriage still existed somewhere beneath the paperwork. Clare looked at him carefully. For the first time in months, she didn't feel angry, just sad. "You made your decision before Emma was born." Ryan lowered his eyes. "It wasn't that simple." "No." His jaw tightened. "I thought I knew what our future looked like." The honesty caught her off guard, because she believed him. Not the justification, the confusion. Ryan genuinely believed he had understood everything, and that belief had destroyed their marriage. Before either could continue, attorneys emerged from nearby offices. The moment disappeared. Professional distance returned. The divorce moved forward. Weeks later, another major filing entered the record. Trust valuations, ownership disclosures, governance summaries. Nothing confidential enough to expose every detail, but enough to establish scale, enough to establish significance, enough to make clear that Clare's inheritance represented far more than anyone originally assumed. The information spread quickly through legal circles, then business circles, then local media. Articles began appearing, most focused on Morrison Holdings. Some focused on governance, others focused on the surprising connection between a high-profile inheritance structure and a pending divorce case. Ryan saw the headlines. So did Vanessa. Neither enjoyed them. Late one evening after another difficult day, Ryan sat alone in his apartment, scrolling through article after article. Eventually he stopped. The screen reflected back at him. Tired eyes. Regret. Questions. His phone rested motionless beside him for several minutes. Then he picked it up, opened Clare's contact information, and stared at her name. For a long time he did nothing. Then, finally, before he could lose his nerve, he pressed call. As the line began ringing, Ryan realized something he should have understood months earlier. The woman he had abandoned might have inherited extraordinary wealth. But that wasn't what he missed. What he missed was the person who had loved him before any of it mattered. And for the first time since serving those divorce papers, he wasn't calling to negotiate. He was calling to ask for another chance. The phone rang 4 times before Clare answered. She had just finished feeding Emma and was standing beside the nursery window, watching snow drift across the parking lot. "Hello?" For a moment, Ryan said nothing. Hearing her voice again made the words harder to say. "It's me." Clare already knew. The silence between them carried too much history for introductions. "What do you need?" Ryan not angry, not warm, simply direct. He swallowed. "I wanted to talk. We have attorneys for that. This isn't about the case." Another pause. He could hear Emma making soft sounds somewhere nearby. The sound twisted something inside him. For months he had convinced himself he was moving toward a better future. A cleaner future. A simpler future. Now all he could think about was everything he had left behind. "Clare," he said quietly, "I made mistakes." She closed her eyes briefly. Not because she wanted revenge, because she was tired. Tired of hearing clarity arrive after damage had already been done. What kind of mistakes? The question caught him off guard. Because she wasn't asking for apologies. She was asking for honesty. "I stopped seeing you." The answer came before he could filter it. "I treated everything like a calculation. Work, status, success, even us." Clare remained silent. Ryan continued. "I thought you had given up." The statement lingered. Then Clare answered softly. "I left my career because we were trying to have a child." Ryan looked down. "I know, you know that now." The difference mattered. Painfully. For years she had attended fertility appointments alone while Ryan stayed at meetings. She endured treatments, complications, losses, fear, then a difficult pregnancy, all while trying to support a marriage she believed still mattered. None of those sacrifices appeared on income statements. None improved executive resumes, but they had been real. Ryan finally understood that. Far too late. "I'm sorry," he said. This time he meant it. Claire believed him. That was the tragedy. She believed his regret was genuine, but regret and trust were not the same thing. "Ryan," she said quietly, "you didn't leave because I lacked money." His chest tightened. "You left because you thought I lacked value." Neither spoke for several seconds. There was no defense against the truth. Eventually, Claire ended the conversation politely. Not cruelly, not dramatically, just firmly. When the call disconnected, Ryan sat alone staring at his phone. For the first time, he understood that wealth had never been the real revelation. The real revelation was discovering who he had become. Meanwhile, another relationship was beginning to fracture. Vanessa noticed the changes immediately. Ryan stopped discussing future plans, stopped talking about promotions, stopped celebrating small victories. His attention drifted elsewhere, toward custody discussions, toward Emma, toward mistakes he could no longer ignore. One evening, Vanessa finally confronted him. "You called her again, didn't you?" Ryan didn't answer immediately. That answer alone told her everything. Vanessa stood. "You can't seriously be considering this. This isn't about getting back together." "Then what is it about?" Ryan exhaled slowly. "Taking responsibility." Vanessa laughed bitterly. Interesting timing. The comment stung because part of him understood her point. Before the inheritance became public, before Morrison Holdings, before the articles, before the headlines, would he have reached the same conclusions? The question haunted him. Vanessa noticed the hesitation, and for the first time she revealed something she usually hid. Fear. Not fear of losing Ryan emotionally. Fear of losing the future she had imagined. The status, the access, the social circles, the life that seemed close enough to touch. "I spent years building my career," she said quietly. "I wasn't going to stay invisible forever." Ryan looked at her. For once, she wasn't pretending. No manipulation, no performance. Just honesty. She wanted security, influence, opportunity. She believed Ryan represented all three, and she had convinced herself Claire was simply an obstacle, not a person, not a wife, not a mother. An obstacle. The realization made Ryan uncomfortable because it sounded familiar. Months earlier, he had done something very similar. He had reduced Claire to a role, a burden, a dependent spouse, someone standing in the way of the future he wanted. The relationship ended 2 weeks later, without drama, without screaming, without public scenes. Just two people finally acknowledging that their ambitions had never been the same thing as love. While that chapter quietly closed, Claire focused on building something entirely different. Part of her inheritance had already begun generating distributions through existing trust structures. The money could have changed every aspect of her life overnight. Instead, she moved carefully, deliberately. Mercer introduced her to several nonprofit directors her grandmother had supported. Family programs, housing initiatives, organizations helping women leave unstable relationships. Claire listened more than she spoke. She recognized pieces of herself in many of their stories. Not identical circumstances, but familiar feelings, fear, isolation, the quiet belief that nobody would help. Several months later, she committed funding to expand transitional housing and counseling services for new mothers. The decision never appeared in newspapers. She preferred it that way, because healing rarely happened in headlines. It happened in ordinary rooms where people finally felt safe enough to breathe. One afternoon after touring one of the facilities, Claire returned home carrying Emma in her arms. Mercer was waiting in the living room. Another package rested on the coffee table. The box looked old, carefully preserved, almost forgotten. "What is it?" Claire asked. Mercer smiled slightly. "The final item from your grandmother's estate." Claire stared at the package. Everything else had already been transferred. The trusts, the documents, the governance records, the inheritance. This was different. Smaller. Personal. Slowly she sat down and opened the box. Inside rested a sealed envelope addressed in elegant handwriting. To Claire. Her hands trembled slightly, because somehow she already knew. Whatever waited inside that envelope was not about money, and it might change the way she understood her entire life. Claire opened the envelope carefully. The paper inside had yellowed slightly with age. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her grandmother's. For a moment she simply stared at the first line. Then she began reading. The letter contained no instructions about trusts, no discussion of holdings, investments, or succession plans. Instead, it spoke about choices, about character, about the danger of confusing wealth with worth. Her grandmother admitted that she had deliberately delayed portions of the inheritance because she wanted Claire to build a life before discovering what waited behind the family name. She wanted her granddaughter to know who she was without money, to learn resilience without privilege, to understand compassion before power. Near the end of the letter, one sentence stopped Claire completely. The greatest inheritance is not what people leave you. It is the person you become before you receive it. Tears blurred the page. Not because of the money, not because of the family empire, because suddenly the entire journey made sense. The years of ordinary life, the sacrifices, the struggles, even the heartbreak. For so long she believed she had lost everything when Ryan left. Now she realized she had never lost herself. And that mattered more than any balance sheet. Months turned into years. The divorce eventually concluded through negotiated agreements and court-approved parenting arrangements. There were consequences. Financial disclosures had exposed decisions Ryan wished he could take back. His reputation suffered. Certain opportunities disappeared. Some professional relationships never fully recovered. But life did not destroy him, nor did Claire try to. He remained part of Emma's life through structured custody schedules and shared responsibilities. The difference was that accountability had replaced entitlement. Over time, he became a more present father than he had ever been as a husband. The regret remained. But so did the lessons. Vanessa disappeared from public conversation almost as quietly as she had entered it. The future she chased never arrived. The influence she wanted proved temporary. Eventually, she moved on to another company and another city. Without scandal. Without triumph. Just another person forced to confront the distance between ambition and fulfillment. Meanwhile, Claire stepped into her responsibilities at Morrison Holdings with surprising ease. Not because she craved power, because she understood responsibility. Board meetings became part of her schedule. Strategic reviews, foundation work, community initiatives. Yet the center of her life never changed. Emma. Every major decision eventually returned to the same question. What kind of world was she helping build for her daughter? The answer shaped everything. Several programs supporting young mothers expanded through partnerships Claire quietly funded. Women's shelters received additional resources. Counseling services reached families who otherwise would have gone without help. Emergency housing programs grew. Most beneficiaries never knew her name. She preferred it that way. The work mattered more than recognition. One spring afternoon, Hankun, years after the divorce papers first appeared on that kitchen table, Claire stood outside one of those family centers watching children play in the sunshine. Emma ran across the grass laughing with friends, healthy, safe, loved. The sound carried through the warm air. Claire smiled, Not because life had become perfect, because peace had finally replaced survival. The hidden heiress everyone failed to understand had inherited far more than money. She had inherited a chance to choose who she wanted to become. And she chose kindness over bitterness, purpose over revenge, dignity over resentment. As Emma ran back toward her, Claire bent down and opened her arms. Her daughter crashed into a hug. The future stretched ahead of them, not defined by betrayal, not defined by inheritance, but by what they would build next. And perhaps that was the real justice all along. If this story reminded you that respect should come before wealth and character should matter before status, feel free to share your thoughts and experiences below.